It's very concerning to our commercial poultry community. I don't know if many of you have heard about this or not, but Tyson is actually closing 2 of the complexes, one in Virginia and one in Arkansas. Tyson Foods is closing 4 more chicken plants, and that's after already shutting down chicken facilities in May and laying off 1,700 workers. In just 18 months, Tyson Foods has closed 8 plants, erasing nearly 3,000 jobs in Arkansas, Indiana, Missouri, Kansas, and Pennsylvania. A colossal shock for thousands of American working families. The higher the tariff, the more likely the company will come into the United States and build a factory. Donald Trump declared boldly, as if every tariff barrier were an unbeatable bring jobs. Home trump card, yet the harsh reality is stark. Instead of returning home, Tyson fled, leaving behind struggling towns with idle production lines, and now hiring signs, collecting dust. In this video, you'll see why Trump's promise of jobs has morphed into an endless chain of export layoffs, and why the fallout doesn't stop at Tyson Foods has just weathered one of the most headline-grabbing shutdowns in American food processing history. Yet President Trump's sky-high tariff policies have only deepened that shock. Over the past 18 months, Tyson Foods has pulled the plug on 8 meat processing plants, wiping out roughly 3,000 jobs across Arkansas, Indiana, Missouri, Kansas, and Pennsylvania. Although company executives insist this was merely an operational optimization, 2 facilities in North Little Rock, Arkansas and Corydon, Indiana shuttered almost overnight, leaving hundreds of workers without paychecks in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, at the White House, Donald Trump remains unfazed. He declared, "The higher the tariff, the more likely the company will come into the United States and build a factory." On paper, it sounds logical. Slap on sky-high duties to goose domestic investment. In reality, however, Tyson Foods did the exact opposite. Rather than relocating production back to U.S. soil, this nation's top meat processor has been on the run, forcing thousands of employees into economic limbo. Let's break down the tariffs Trump has slapped on American industry: a 25% levy on imported steel and aluminum, additional duties on foreign-grown meat, and even the threat of a 2,000% tariff on Mexican auto imports to protect domestic manufacturers. Such staggering fees rattled businesses. Nationwide input costs soared, supply chains buckled, and CEOs were left weighing profit versus pain. Tyson's sprawling production network depends on flexible access to raw materials. When tariffs spiked, so did feed costs, freight charges, and logistics expenses. The boardroom's answer: restructure the company, close underperforming plants, and shift capacity to newer facilities or lower-cost regions. What's truly shocking is that the North Little Rock plant, home to over 300 workers, and Corydon, employing more than 500, were decommissioned without any plan to reopen equivalent lines stateside. Butchers, technicians, and warehouse staff woke up one morning to a dead production line, and Trump's promise to bring jobs home evaporated like a hollow slogan. The gulf between campaign rhetoric and real-world fallout became undeniable when Tyson had to set aside hundreds of millions of dollars for severance and site closures, even enlisting government help to find displaced workers. Clearly, tariffs aren't forcing companies home. They're pushing them to cut U.S. production and chase profitability elsewhere, or simply export those layoffs. So here's the question. Were Trump's jobs threats really meant to drive businesses back to American soil, or did they pressure them to abandon ship? With costs skyrocketing, corporations will always chase the bottom line, not build new plants. And the unvarnished truth lies in the data: thousands unemployed, hundreds of millions spent on shutdowns, and once prosperous communities left reeling. Next up, we'll dive into how Trump's tariff machine actually operates, trace its ripple effects through the food supply chain, and forecast the future of America's meat processing industry, where bringing jobs home could become a never-ending cycle of export layoffs. Is this protectionist policy saving US jobs or cornering businesses into a no-win scenario? Let's find out. On Monday morning, many Perry plant workers barely had time to open an email titled "Plant Closed." Before by that afternoon, they found themselves staring at the facto's silent gates with no chance to prepare or receive the 60-day War Act notice. Among the nearly 1,300 employees affected in Perry, a full 60% are immigrant workers who rely entirely on their poultry line wages to feed their families. Behind this sudden blow lie the loopholes in the War Act, the federal law that requires employers to provide at least 60 days' notice before a mass layoff. Internal documents from Tyson revealed deliberate delays and the dumping of critical news into late emails designed to evade both union scrutiny and media attention. In doing so, company leadership not only skirted the law, but stripped workers of their right to secure retraining or new employment, deepening their hardship. The ripple effects were brutal. Within just 3 weeks, Perry's Economic Development Office reports that 7 local businesses, from grocery stores and diners to gas stations, shuttered completely, while many others saw revenue plummet by 40 to 60%. Tens of millions in lost income weren't just an economic hit. They were a gut punch to a community that had counted on Tyson as its bedrock. As small business owners slashed hours and payrolls, Perry transformed into a ghost town. Empty streets, sparse traffic, and the promise of work, locked behind cold factory doors. Rather than investing in modernization, Tyson chose retreat, leaving workers in the heartland wrestling with economic despair. Trump's sky-high tariff regime, hailed as a means to force companies back to US soil, only underscores Tyson's opposite outcome. Instead of capital flowing to new, domestic plants, it ebbed away from traditional factory towns. Short-term profits were preserved through restructuring and closures, but the social and economic toll stretches far beyond the balance sheet. This turn of events raises a thorny question, not just for Tyson, but for the entire Bring Jobs Home agenda. Are reported new job figures genuine, or merely a pretext for corporations to cash in before abandoning communities in ruin? How many actual positions have these tariffs created, and what hard-learned lessons should America's factory towns draw from Trump's high-stakes trade gambit while Tyson Foods was moaning about cost optimization? CEO Donnie King still pocketed $12 million a year, nearly 300 times the average worker salary, and continued to collect federal farm subsidies. According to Morningstar, his total compensation for fiscal 2024 reached $12 million, including salary bonuses and stock options. Meanwhile, data from Sentient Media shows Tyson hauled in at least $250 million in direct subsidies and over $3 billion in supply chain support from U.S. Department of Agriculture programs, MUSIC. But that's not all. The food giant also spent more than $2 million in 2023 alone on lobbying efforts in Washington, targeting agencies like USDA and OSHA to safeguard its business interests. This money gave Tyson a powerful voice whenever labor safety rules or slaughterhouse regulations were under review, helping ensure their profits weren't hurt by demands for worker protection or environmental safeguards. Yet while executives and board members lounged in D.C. communities in small towns, bore the brunt of Trump's trade war. A 2019 Federal Reserve study found that Trump's 25% steel and aluminum tariffs reduced manufacturing employment by 0.6% compared to a no-tariff scenario. Economists confirmed this loss again in an Investopedia report. By 2019, industries using metals as inputs had lost about 75,000 jobs relative to a no-tariff baseline. The fallout didn't stop at lost jobs. The spike in input costs drove consumer prices up by 1% at the factory gate. According to the Fed, when raw material costs soared from steel and aluminum to animal feed, Tyson had no choice but to shift the burden onto American consumers or /headcount to protect its margins. So what's really going on? The promise that the higher the tariff, the more likely companies will build factories here, once touted as a job-saving panacea, has revealed itself as a cold-blooded cover for ruthless restructuring, shuttering old lines, laying off workers and preserving only modern plants, or chasing export markets. Closer to home, short-term gains for shareholders and executives were secured, while tens of thousands of workers, people hoping for stable jobs, became hidden casualties in the company's financial statements. The protectionist policy, marketed as bringing jobs home, has in fact pushed jobs further away. As import duties soared, firms like Tyson realized domestic costs outweighed any benefits, and their choice was not to build new capacity, but to abandon traditional job hubs altogether. In this context, booming slogans of "Bring jobs home" serve merely as the soundtrack to a profit optimization game. The moment Tyson Foods announced supply chain optimization, hundreds of small-scale farmers got the shock of a lifetime. Poultry contracts were abruptly cancelled. Their flocks left without a buyer, forcing them to sell equipment and birds at rock-bottom prices just to cover bank debts. An investigation by the Missouri Independent reveals many farms were repossessed and liquidated, debts piling up, all because Tyson cut off its inputs suddenly and without negotiation. Families already on the brink lost their sole source of income, scrambling for government aid or seeking refuge in local church networks. Before they could recover, a new blow struck in Asian skies. China, once one of Boeing's biggest customers, halted all further 737 MAX deliveries in retaliation to the US, slapping a staggering 145% tariff on Chinese goods. Worse yet, at least 3 737 MAX jets bound for carriers like Xiamen Airlines were forced to return to America from Zhoushan Port in April, imperiling tens of billions of dollars in contracts and threatening roughly 40,000 American aerospace jobs. With each jet valued at over $55 million, the potential losses ripple from factory floors to export docks to maintenance and operations crews. As both the food and aviation supply chains convulse, the next casualties are those most vulnerable: children and local restaurant owners. The USDA's Farm to School program, which funnels over $1 billion annually to help schools and food banks buy domestic produce, was slashed just 3 months ago, leaving school kitchens scrambling under skyrocketing ingredient costs. Prices for staples like eggs, poultry and vegetables shot up 10 to 15%, forcing many school districts to cut meal portions or raise lunch prices. Burdens ultimately borne by parents and students. From Tyson Foods to Boeing, then spreading to schools and mom-and-pop diners. This is a heartbreaking domino effect. When industry giants in food and aviation lobby to protect profits, workers, farmers and children become the weakest links. Promises are shattered under crushing costs. Instead of investing in growth, corporations slash operations, leaving behind ghost towns, abandoned farms and struggling school cafeterias. The moment those barrage threats of "smash the tariff" rates went public, economists scoffed, dubbing it the taco strategy. Trump always chickens out, because President Trump frequently brandished sky-high duties only to back down. The instant businesses pushed back. On the surface, it comes off like haggling, imposing a 25% metal tariff, slapping 10% on aluminum, even menacing with a 2,000% auto tariff to force companies to bring jobs home. Yet as soon as the first real blowback hit, the White House rushed to delay or dial back the penalties, creating a swirl of uncertainty for investors. It was in this climate that Tyson Foods found itself ensnared in the tariff trap. Sudden spikes in input costs forced the meat giant to reevaluate its production strategy. Rather than plowing capital into new U.S. plants, Tyson shuttered older lines. At least 15 processing facilities went dark between 2024 and 2025, according to Investigate Midwest. Perhaps most striking, many of those Closures struck rural communities already struggling where jobs were scarce and deeply tied to Tyson's supply chain. Trump's tariff logic slammed Tyson with what felt like a sudden blow. Raw material prices surged. Labor shortages worsened as workers sought alternative employment, and retaliatory tariffs from other nations closed off key export markets. Facing mounting international counterstrikes, domestic plants were left with a stark choice: shut down or ship out instead of expanding production on U.S. soil. This stark contrast lays bare the real impact a policy sold as a job savior triggered wave after wave of production cuts. Tyson was only the opening act. Once corporations recognized that tariffs were eating into profits, they didn't hesitate to move capital abroad or simply scale back. The once cheered slogan of jobs, jobs, jobs quickly drowned under headlines of layoffs and silent factory floors. With the taco strategy, every tariff threat functions less as a tool for rebuilding industry and more as a bargaining chip. As companies pack up and leave, policy is adjusted to cool the crisis, but local workers and communities are left scrambling hornless against abrupt policy reversals. This tariff mechanism has driven U.S. industries into a shutdown or ship-out reality, completely contradicting the original goal of reviving American manufacturing. When tariffs cease to be a catalyst and instead become a sledgehammer, smashing the domestic economy, American workers bear the brunt of the damage. Thousands of employees, from meat processing lines in North Little Rock to poultry farms in rural America, have been reduced to mere line items in corporate restructuring reports. Meanwhile, the White House's bold declarations that the higher the tariff, the more companies will build factories here ring hollow, never tested against the harsh realities on the ground. If Washington fails to reset its compass, there will be many more North Little Rocks to come. Factories that fall silent and communities left scrambling for survival. This blind protectionism hasn't just driven companies like Tyson Foods to retreat, it has unleashed a domino effect that reaches small farmers, school programs, and entire industries once anchored by domestic supply chains. Music. Rather than fulfilling the promise to bring jobs home, these extreme tariffs are forcing businesses to contract layoff workers and redirect investment toward lowest-cost regions. The dream of Made in USA is fast becoming nothing more than a slogan on marketing banners. While the reality for towns counting on those jobs is forlorn for rail signs on idle equipment, workers cannot continue sliding helplessly beneath the weight of unpredictable policy swings. They deserve consultation and timely notice before every major layoff. Only when policy truly considers people, the lifeblood of communities, can tariffs serve their intended role of balancing trade rather than acting as bargaining chips that leave devastation in their wake. Meanwhile, neighboring Canada and Mexico have seized on U.S. tariff upheavals to attract American capital and labor as companies seek escape routes. Trump's approach has only tangled domestic politics and fractured nearly every link in the global trade chain. Could this tactical retreat be the opening other competitors need to seize the upper hand? Hit subscribe on Deep State and join us as we peel back the layers of international trade's backstage drama and uncover real solutions to the jobs crisis under the shadow of next-generation tariffs in our upcoming videos. American industries like aerospace and defense, with Canada as the largest steel and aluminum supplier to the U.S. Prime Minister Mark Carney spent much of 2018 the campaign pushing back against Trump's tariffs, instead leaving it to the Canada-US Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who tweeted he's taken note of what Trump has said and promised to defend workers and community. Trump has promised the tariffs would come in on June 4th, but he hasn't signed anything to make that official, which could lead to a movie we saw back in March. He has made the decision to add a 25% tariff. So now steel aluminum tariffs will come into effect tomorrow at the rate of 50%. The administration ended up quickly backing down before those additional tariffs came into force. but the constant threats underscore the chaos that is rapidly hurting Canadian businesses. This isn't just bad policy, it's dangerous. Canada is the #1 steel and aluminum supplier to the US. You can't rip out half of your supply chain overnight and pretend nothing will break. Aerospace and defense sectors tied directly to national security are at risk.